Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Hatim Chraibi, co-founder and managing director at SPIRE Advisory Group, a general partner at SPIRE Atlas Ventures. Hatim Chraibi has been instrumental in global medical device innovation and startup acceleration within the health sciences and digital health space. With over 25 years of international experience, he has guided cutting-edge companies through product development, go-to-market strategy, and global expansion, drawing on leadership roles at Philips Medical Systems, Covidien, and multiple medtech organizations. Chraibi's expertise extends to mentoring startups at Canadian Entrepreneurs in Life Sciences, leading digital health pilot programs in Africa, and advising on strategic positioning for ventures in deep tech, AI, and sustainability. As a multilingual connector in the Bay Area and globally, he bridges innovators, investors, and partners, catalyzing scale and impact for next-generation healthcare solutions. Chraibi's advisory and mentoring roles with initiatives like the French Tech Hub and the African Diaspora Network have positioned him as a catalyst for entrepreneurship, helping shape the next wave of digital health and medtech leaders through hands-on guidance and strategic partnerships. In this conversation, we discuss his insights on global opportunities in healthcare innovation, particularly through the lens of AI and virtual teams. Hatim discusses the importance of resilience in entrepreneurship, the cultural differences in startup approaches, and the role of mentorship in navigating the healthcare landscape. He emphasizes the need for startups to engage with the global market and leverage technology to improve healthcare outcomes worldwide. Lastly, Hatim also highlights the potential of virtual venture studios to connect entrepreneurs with resources and expertise across borders, ultimately fostering innovation in healthcare. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you these conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions. The real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry-leading healthcare founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the strategies that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the minds shaping the industry. Now let's have Hatim tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Hatim, to the K in Clarity podcast. For the people listening, can you give a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Mezue, for having me and for reaching out. I saw some of your videos. They look great. The insight is always interesting. Great questions. So I was looking forward to this. So thank you for having me. So my name is Hatim Chraibi, originally from Morocco and North Africa. So grew up in Morocco and then traveled quite a bit. I was fortunate that I had a father, may he rest in peace, who gave me the bug of traveling, discovering, going to meet people. So I was fortunate that I studied in various different places and ended up doing my MBA at McGill University in Montreal, where I'm right now in Montreal visiting. I don't live here, but I'm visiting. But basically, my background is mostly, I would say, if there's anything unique or not unique, but something that a common thread in my background is the global aspects, is looking for global opportunities for a global world. So I would say, working first with a computer design company in Montreal, then with Philips Medical System, big, large Dutch med device company in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and then Medtronic through Tyco Healthcare, Covidien. But in all my mandates, I've been doing international. That gave me the opportunity to understand other cultures, but also to look for opportunities where, complementary opportunities in different ecosystems. And about 8 years ago, I co-founded a consulting group / accelerator in the San Francisco Bay Area in Palo Alto. where, again, exact same thread, we look at innovation all over the world and we expose it in the Bay Area. The idea being that great science, great technology can come from anywhere in the world. Great scientists can be anywhere, but there is clearly an appetite for risk in the Silicon Valley that we don't find elsewhere. I mean, it's coming in other places, but it's not there yet. So the idea for us was always to try to take this opportunity to expose great people that are not in the Bay Area, that are not also in the US, and expose them there. So we've been doing that for a while, and now we're launching, we're a little more ambitious, where we are launching a venture builder, venture studio, that's very unique because it's seamless between the Silicon Valley and North and West Africa. The idea, again, same idea of great people, great innovation can come from anywhere, but sometimes they need to be polished and positioned in that ecosystem. And I know we had a conversation earlier about post-COVID. I am personally a true believer that the world is becoming seamless in the sense that, you can now talk to anywhere. Proof, case in point right now, us talking, but also working together without having met a person. The in-person connection is obviously very important, I'm denying that, but I think today there are lots of opportunity because of this virtual ecosystem. So here, hopefully I didn't bore you with too many details, but that's kind of the context and my background.
No, that was good. As you know, we typically like to do an icebreaker question here. And so my question for you is, if you could assemble a healthcare startup dream team with founders and mentors from any three continents that you maybe have a personal relationship with, or you feel is at the cutting edge, who would you actually want to bring together, and what major challenge would you have them tackle first?
Well, I'm gonna go with the obvious one. Maybe your listeners are not gonna be too happy because it's the elephant in the room, which is AI, right? I mean, AI is right now disrupting every sector, every space, every industry, and the impact it's having on healthcare, and it will have on healthcare. I mean, it's coming at a speed, it's fast and furious. It's truly amazing. So what I would say is it would have to be, I mean, if I had an advice to give to someone who wants to go, like you said, build a team in the medical space, in the life science space, I would say definitely focus on how AI can resolve a problematic, any type of problematic. It's just obvious that whether it's his imaging, radiology, any type of problem that you have in healthcare, AI can absolutely, power, a faster treatment delivery, better, a more accurate treatment. So I would say, obviously, in those medical teams, you always want to have the perspective of the doctors and hospitals. So I would definitely want to have a doctor on the team, someone who understands how things are done today, so that when you expose your solution, they can tell you, yes, this makes sense. I would use this. I want and things like that. And then I would definitely look at technologists. As I mentioned, again, this is self-serving because I really believe that you have great AI talent all over the world. So, I mean, again, I'm speaking now specifically of Morocco because I've been going quite a bit for this venture studio idea, but I am just amazed at how young people are adopting AI. So I would say your technical team, again, if you're building an AI company in health, should be an A team. And we're just fortunate that you can now find these A teams anywhere in the world. And the other thing I would suggest is sometimes teams have worked together. So in my case, I am fortunate that in my venture studio project, my co-founder is a CTO who is based in the Silicon Valley, in the San Francisco Bay Area, but has dealt with this team. So when you have someone who knows how to deal, because a lot of the concerns that people tell me about, hiring an AI team, I don't know, in India, Turkey, is how do you manage these people? So if you're fortunate enough to have those CTOs that have a track record working with people in a specific region, then you want to onboard a person like that in your team. So sometimes you go into a startup and they're like, okay, let's go look for resources in Turkey, in India, in China, in Morocco, wherever, because they're cheaper, because our burn rate will be lower. There's an element of risk there. But then if you're able to find a CTO who's done that already with a specific team, then you diminish the risk because you de-risk the opportunity because There's a familiarity of that CTO with his team. They know what they're doing. They have a track record, which is the case of our Vector Studio CTO. So I would say these are for me the key components. Someone who understands the medical field, who's potentially, ideally, a practicing physician, or it doesn't have to be a physician, nurse who's in the hospital setting, in that team. So they understand the problematic and they can make sure that the features that you're coming up with are actually going to be used, right? And you need a strategy person who knows what the competitive landscape, because again, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to make sure that it's a solution that's not out there. It doesn't have to be, because sometimes the market is so big, and that's what's happening in AI. A lot of people are afraid to go in medical spaces where there is AI because they'll tell you, well, it's already done. But in a lot of these sectors, the market need is just huge, right? It's a blue ocean. Every clinic, hospitals worldwide is going to start using this solution. I work with a great company that I advise called Claim, that does claim management in hospitals and uses AI tools basically to review. A lot of small clinics, hospitals in the US are sometimes having issues because they don't do just health. They have to manage the cash flow. And a lot of them are in trouble because they have a lot of outstanding claims. They have to deal with insurance. As you know, the US health system is very convoluted. And basically, they're doing an amazing job as evaluating the claim, at factoring. And I think it's going to be amazing because it's going to improve the healthcare system overall. So I'm very bullish, obviously, on AI. I'm not saying it's, the solution to everything. I'm not saying that there's not things that are done that are wrong with AI, but I think there's no turning back. So again, I would definitely advise anyone who wants to start something. Obviously, they have to have a passion for it. They have to have the right team, some expertise. But assembling a team, I'd make sure they always have voice of the customer, with having someone who's from that space, who can understand the problematic, but also focus, I think, on technology. Because now it's clear that technology, it started with robotics, right? With the surgery, you can, now doing surgery with robots, the Da Vinci device with what's that name? Intuitive Surgical and others. It is where the world is going. There's no doubt about it. Hopefully that answers your question. Again, I tend to go on tangents, and because it's such an exciting space. There's so much to say.
Absolutely. But to dive into your career, I know you began it with, companies like Philips and Medtronic before moving to
Yeah.
maybe the more nimble side of startups. And so
Yeah.
how did these experiences really shape your perspective on, where real healthcare innovation actually happens?
So again, obviously, I'm going to be frank. I think the small organizations were much better at giving me that urge to say, hey, innovation is a lot of those larger organizations. And when I was there, I'm sorry to say this is so long ago, it's in the 2000s, there was an emphasis on innovation, but not to the extent that we have today. And a lot of those large organizations, I felt back then, again, now it has changed, didn't feel the threat of smaller incumbent small companies. And I think, through the 2000s, now it's just basically crazy, the number of small medical device startups. There's so many tools that all these companies have that, the big companies like Philips and Medtronic feel like, they have to stay at the edge, because otherwise they become obsolete. Their devices become obsolete. But when I was there, I have to say that the focus was mostly on customer service, providing a great service, adding features to devices, not so much as at big innovation. But what I've definitely learned there is managing people, managing expectations. Larger organizations, again, are lots of politics, much more convoluted, right? But again, I was very fortunate. I have to say that I lived in the Silicon Valley. So even when I was with Philips and Medtronic, I'd be hanging out with friends who were doing or starting to do startups. So the innovation bug, I caught that very, very quickly. Maybe I wouldn't if I was in Minnesota or in another, with Medtronic somewhere else, or with Philips somewhere else in Andover, in Massachusetts, where we have other offices. Again, I think today, I haven't worked for a large company as an employee for a very long time. I think that has changed completely, because a lot of those large, the Philips, they have, a lot of innovation labs. They stimulate, they promote, innovation much more than they did maybe 20 years ago. Because they understand, things change so quickly. You can be left behind very quickly if you don't have the right device, or if you have a device that's much better than what you do, because, the paradigm shifts, changes a lot. Case in point, again, we keep going back to AI, which is, I think, exactly what's happening.
It's funny you mentioned those places. I have connections to some of those, but
Okay.
regardless, having worked across continents from North America to Canada, Taiwan, and the Bay Area, what similarities or gaps do you see in startup ecosystems, and how do you really help founders bridge those differences?
So I'll tell you the larger gap that I see, and this is again elephant in the room. The human being seems to think in very, we're sometimes framed a certain way, and it's very hard to reformat humans. The reason why I'm saying that is, when I speak to startups and I do a lot of mentoring, again, through our SPIRE advisory, our Palo Alto structure, we do a lot of acceleration. We have a program where we support Canadian startups through an organization called Sales. And invariably, when I look at entrepreneurs outside of the Silicon Valley, and again, it's changing. There's that glass ceiling where they'll tell you that they're doing something, but they're not ambitious in their thinking. So I'll give you an example. I work with Canadian startups who explain to me sometimes in their pitch how they're going to conquer or how they're going to address the Canadian market before any other market, because they're there. And I look at them and I am like, well, you speak the same language as the US. You're basically, I shouldn't be saying that in this geopolitical condition where we are today, you're basically so similar to Americans. Why are you not just going directly to the US and addressing from Canada, of course, but, go after FDA, submit that, feedback, voice of the, because it's a 400 million market versus 1/10, which is the Canadian market. And when you ask them that question, they usually have no answer, because they understand that what I'm telling them is logical. And the only reason why they're not doing it is because it's that fear of the unknown. So I've lived this in Canada, which obviously you would think would be, the easier entrepreneurs to basically look for the US market. And they don't, There's great innovation in Canada, great universities, great IP, but they lack this aggressive saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to speak to these people. And that's what an entrepreneur needs. But I experienced it in Europe, in Taiwan, in North Africa, same thing where I'm in Morocco. Sometimes amazing solutions. And then they do explain to you, even worse, how they're going to go after the Moroccan market, which is, again, 40 million people. The purchasing power is not as high. Why would you? You always have to be looking for an idea that solves a global problematic. You can't go ask a VC or investor to give you $1 million, $2 million to address, to be able to address a total addressable market of, 50 million. They're like, why would they do that? They'd rather go. So, and again, that's for me the biggest difference between the Silicon Valley and the rest of the world, including the US. And I think the reason for it, which makes a lot of sense, it's, again, crazy how as adults, when you were framed a certain way, to change that framework is very, very complicated, is that in the Silicon Valley, they've seen so many of these successes. And again, I'm not saying, by no means, I'm not saying that this is not now happening elsewhere. But if you've seen so many companies, which is still a small percentage of success, right? Startups in the Silicon Valley, like elsewhere, chances are, 9 out of 10 are going to fail at some point. So it's just, the numbers game. But that one that succeeds, because, there's momentum, there's enough of these companies that the people who are there have seen successes and they've touched it and they've talked to people, that it's more realistic for them than for someone who's in Casablanca or Montreal or Calgary or Paris or, they've seen a lot of them and they are there. So they know, listen, these people made it here. There is no reason why I shouldn't be ambitious. And elsewhere, it's more difficult. What I am saying is, because the world is becoming seamless and global, these people should be more ambitious. And basically, what we're trying to do in the venture building is exactly that, is, engage with enough entrepreneurs to change that framework and say, hey, you have an amazing idea. Go figure out if, the problem is global. And if it is, you need to pitch your solution as a global solution and say that you're going to make it, show that you have that confidence. Because if you don't look confident, then the investor is not going to do that for you. They'll go for someone else. So again, that's the long-winded answer to your question. But major, major difference is the framework of the entrepreneurs. Again, they're amazing entrepreneurs everywhere. They're ambitious. They're smart. They have great science, great technology, but they tend to think small versus the Silicon Valley. And again, it's not because people in the Silicon Valley are smarter. It's because they've seen it so much more that they believe it. When you see something, and it did happen to me, which is the funniest, is like when I tell people to do crazy things, they would look at me and invariably they would ask me, do you think this is the Silicon Valley? So they would say it actually. They say, do you think this is Silicon Valley? This is not, this is, and I'm like, but what's the difference? Your company is a legal entity and you can manufacture, build anywhere. Why would you say that it's only a Silicon Valley company that can do that? That makes absolutely no sense. So it's interesting. It's interesting, but it's changing a lot. Obviously now, again, with the world becoming more virtual, global, you see a lot of these ideas changing.
I know you believe that, great startup ideas can come from anywhere, as you mentioned. What qualities or approaches separate entrepreneurs who succeed in building global companies from those who actually struggle to break through and actually get through that?
Resilience. Resilience is by far the number one. Resilience is, and I had to learn it myself. Again, a lot of things, and there's a lot of things that I don't know, but the things that I've learned, I'm living it right now with my venture studio. When you're building a venture builder or any type of business, it doesn't have to be a startup. You're going to take hits and you're going to fall and you're going to and you hear it from a lot of those, guys who made it, right? You see them interviews, Airbnb and others saying, listen, I maxed my credit cards. I was done. There was nothing else. We were done. And next thing you know, it's $1 billion company. So when you talk to people, and you can see this very quickly, people who are going to fold when they start having issues and, they get an offer for a job and they say, well, thank you very much, but this is not for me. Versus people who, when you talk to them, it's do or die. I mean, this is what I'm doing and I'm going to go until there's no more resources. And these are the people. Again, this is not guarantee of success, but it's a prerequisite for success. If you don't have that, you're going to get so many hits. And again, you're not born with it, but you have to take small hits every day so that at some point when you're taking those hits, it doesn't affect you as much emotionally. You're like, okay, last month, my bank account was 0 and I survived it. It's going to happen again. And when you're in that state, it's easier to succeed because emotionally you're stronger to be able to take these hits. And when you speak to entrepreneurs, you can feel it. And then you have a few conversations and the way they react, you can say, well, this guy is willing to go all the way and, he has a tough skin and he's going to be able to withstand the bad times. And others, they just won't. And again, nothing wrong with them. And sometimes they don't know that they won't. So it's not like they're trying to cheat you into doing something. Is they think they're going to do it. And then when the bad times happen, you see how they react and you're like, well, they're not going to. So I would say that's for me the number one thing. The second one that's important is that they're subject matter experts. Like they know when you start speaking with an entrepreneur and they tell you about their idea, you start asking about the competitive landscape, who plays, why. And then if they haven't done their homework, you can do your homework yourself and say, hey, these guys haven't done the basic work of understanding who is in the market, who does what, why do they have something unique. That's another one that for me is big, and on both these, if you're an investor or an advisor, potential advisor, you can figure these things out fairly quickly.
Gotcha. Startups often struggle to access capital and mentorship, especially in healthcare, which, others would consider risky.
Yeah.
What strategies have you found most effective and compelling for actually connecting promising founders, especially from underrepresented regions, to the resources that the Bay Area provides and beyond?
You know, one thing that I find amazing in the US in general, but mostly in the Bay Area, that I'll tell you a little anecdote, which was actually really cool. When I moved to the US after high school, I would basically be in situations many times where I'd be talking to people about things and, problems or something, and they always offer to help. Always. Like, crazy. And, I was telling you earlier about framework, like the way you grew up and the way you're framed in thinking about things. And when they would offer to help me, I would be paranoid. I'm like, I don't have money to pay them. I have nothing to give them. Why are they doing this? And sometimes I wouldn't take their help because I was so scared or worried to owe them that I would be like, there's something weird. And it took me a long time to figure out that the concept of paying forward is alive and kicking in the US and in the Bay Area. People that tell you, yeah, I'll help you. Because they knew that maybe 10, 20 years down the road, five, I don't know, there'll be a situation where they need help where either you'll be able to help them or someone else would help them. So for me, and now I am in the frame state of saying, whenever someone needs half an hour, I'm more than happy to give it to them. When I have it, of course. And I think people in other areas, you were talking about mentoring, right? So the program that we do with Canada, we bring these Canadian startups to the Silicon Valley. And we do these programs that are fully virtual. So they do workshops on Zoom, and then we find mentors for them to engage with for a couple of hours a month, 2, 3, 4 hours a month. And basically, it's much easier to get some people engaged than you would think, because they're like, you know what? I help someone, maybe their idea is good, and I end up coming in as an advisor or investing. So there's a lot of those possibilities, but if you don't go ask, they just won't happen, right? You have to put yourself out there and ask. That's the other thing with entrepreneurs that you were asking earlier about, people who are willing to ask. The worst that can happen when you ask someone to help you. Let's take a specific example to what you're talking about. You're in Pennsylvania or Oregon or wherever, and you have this great idea, and you go to LinkedIn and you find a person in the Bay Area, either a VC or someone who's an expert in that space. It costs you absolutely nothing to reach out to them. The worst case scenario is that they don't reply to you, and not because they're bad people, because they're overwhelmed and they probably have like 50 people who sent them the same, invitation on LinkedIn. Second worst is that they tell you, listen, thank you so much for reaching out. I have absolutely no bandwidth. I'm completely swamped. I would love to help you. Reach out to me in 6 months or a year. Hopefully, I'll be able to help you. And the third one is that they say, yeah, let's have a half-hour call. So an entrepreneur that really wants something has to be willing to do this. They have to be willing to actually go call, reach out, and you'd be shocked at how many people are going to respond. And if you send to 20 people, yeah, maybe one would say yes. But you take that one, and if you don't put yourself out there, the chances of success are, I guarantee you, zero. If you do, yeah, they're probably 5, 10%, 15%, but at least you're giving yourself a chance. Again, the other thing is there was a video of Steve Jobs when he was like 12 years old, 14 years old. No internet at that time, nothing. He just had the phone book and a phone. And I think he reached out to, I think it was HP, one of the founders of HP, found his name in Palo Alto in the phone, called him. The guy replied. At that time, I think it was easier to answer because it was a landline's phone, and, you would be calling people. And he asked to have, an internship in the summer, and they say, yeah, why don't you come? 14 years old, but, that's an example of a guy, obviously super successful today, that, hey, go and ask. The words that can say. And again, culturally, sometimes it's complicated. Again, coming from my culture as a Moroccan, and I have that problem till today. I'm always, you have some pride, you're always afraid or uncomfortable asking. There are people who are, and these are the best entrepreneurs, they just go and ask. Knock at doors, ask. The worst that can happen is no, not interested.
How do you see, virtual teams and venture studios as well changing the landscape for healthcare startups globally?
So I am absolutely bullish about this. And again, I would love to say that it's something that I guessed, that and I'm super smart and I figured that's what's going to happen. It's absolutely not the case. What I found out through doing what we're doing, for example, with the Canadians, is, pre-COVID, we used to do these programs where we would bring entrepreneurs to the Silicon Valley. Not very efficient because there was costs of flights, of staying, and then, we had to budget all this. And then post-COVID, we were doing them on Zoom, a program for 4 months, all on Zoom, but very heavy interaction every week. And then they would come for 2-3 days for investors meeting in the Bay Area. I am today convinced that you can build ventures where you have the CEO in my case, I would say Northwest Africa in Casablanca, a guy who has a bright idea, and the CTO in the Silicon Valley. But then the tech team is in Morocco, and that CTO manages the tech team. And then you have advisors all over the world. I mean, that's, for me, perfectly doable. And I think that's going to be the new reality. What it does, it's going to democratize access to ideas when you're in the Silicon Valley. So when you're in the Silicon Valley, if you're an angel group, a VC, your potential, even though they already get a lot of deal flow in terms of startups, is not limited to what you have there. Now you can actually go and look at a company somewhere in the world and do your due diligence and know exactly what they're doing and trust what they're doing, because there's, exchange of documents, of information and everything. And you can invest in a company. So for me, this new virtual world is now a reality. It's just happening. So what it's doing is that it's giving more access to startups, to people, to investors all over the world. Obviously, mutually, what it does is a lot of smart people who are not in the Silicon Valley can now have startups that are positioned in the Silicon Valley at the same time as they're positioned elsewhere. And it's not just the Silicon Valley, right? I mean, you have an advisor in the Middle East, in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Saudi, you have the guy in Europe, and you can work on that same startup and work seamlessly, because you can have Zooms every freaking day if you want, with whoever you want, and then go through the deliverables. The deliverables are the deliverables, right? I mean, if you have work to do and this is what you said you're going to deliver, you don't have to be in the same office or in the same country or in the same city. I think this is what's going to happen overall globally. And I think our initiative, what we're trying to do with this venture builder, is just one minuscule attempt to, we're probably one of the very few ones who are doing it. But I truly believe in it because, again, it's one thing if I was selling it as theory, but we've experienced it. We've taken companies that are in Canada and got them through a program where they've created an ecosystem of advisors. They've raised funding in the Silicon Valley without ever being in the Silicon Valley. They basically, as I said, came for, at the end of the program, they would come for an investor meeting, but otherwise they are. And during COVID, I remember going for walks with a good friend of mine who's now the CEO of a very large company in the Silicon Valley, who told me, we were walking and he's like, we just bought a company and I have never met the people in person ever. He's like, if you had told me this a year ago, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy. This is impossible. All through Zoom. Obviously, there's legal teams getting involved. There is a lot of work in the background with exchange of information. I mean, they didn't just buy, they've done their homework, but they've done their homework virtually. So I believe that this is the world. And the amazing thing about it is a scientist or a great entrepreneur in Connecticut can now basically, if they do obviously you have to do the work. That nothing substitute that. Go find the right people who are going to work with you, build a great deck, ask questions, have a compelling story that you can defend. Nothing replaces that. But once you have that, then you can raise funding in the Silicon Valley. You can go on LinkedIn and find who's the top expert in that space or the second, third expert. Go to large companies that would be potential acquirers and try to find people who work in this company and reach out, ask them questions. Maybe, you'll have a Zoom with someone and you'll really get along and that person will come in as an advisor. these things today happen.
Can you tell the audience, about your work in building a virtual venture studio in Africa? And what are the biggest challenges and opportunities in connecting African entrepreneurs to mentors and capital around the world?
It's a great question, but I think it's basically summarizing everything I just said now. So you'll go. A lot of our investors in Morocco are strategics. They're industrial companies that know that AI is going to disrupt the world and want to basically be looking at innovation in that space, right? And I think the work that we need to do, and the reason why I love what I'm doing, is even when we decide not to go forward with an entrepreneur, any type of interaction, what you were asking earlier about mentoring and engaging. I am convinced that every time I have a meeting with someone, first of all, I learn absolutely a lot from them. So it's always enriching for me. But I always feel I'm changing their thinking, their perspective, at least a little bit in every one of our calls. So it's always or our meetings, right? So I feel I'm having an impact in Africa by doing the work I'm doing, which I'm happy about. Me and the other people in our organization, the CTO, the advisors, the investors. Then the work that we have to do is, first of all, work on that person to change their mindset. What we were talking about is through working with them. Before we decide we're going to build this startup with you, we have this 6 months time frame, which we have with about 40 or 50 entrepreneurs, where we learn to know them, they learn to know us. And as we do that, we also find out how flexible or how much do they listen, how much are they willing to learn from us. And that would make the relationship much easier after if we decide to co-found the company with them. So we're doing two things at the same time. We're convincing each other that this is a great opportunity to create a great startup. But as we're doing that, we're feeling each other out in terms of, can we work together? Are you going to be able to let and get feedback and because that's the most important. And at the same time, we try to convince them that what we're doing, the sky is the limit. We're going to be basically going all out. We're going to really, so they learn from that process. And so again, at the end of the 6 months, we might not invest with them, but we feel that we would have probably helped change a little bit of how they think, which for me is amazing. And at the end, we invest in one of these companies every 6 months to build a portfolio of 10. But the beauty of this is that they get to talk to me, to my CTO, to all of our advisors, and so we're building an ecosystem of people who are going to be engaging with these people, hopefully giving them advice, feedback, and everything. And at the same time, obviously, the ultimate goal is to say, we're going to build a startup with you. But, every 6 months, it's going to be one out of 50. But the others would be equipped to go and do more things. And obviously, we want to stay engaged with them and help them in any way we can. Again, idea of paying forward. I'm going to keep helping whoever I can help, because maybe in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, they're going to come back and, I'm going to need them for something, or someone that I know would need help from them, and they'll help them. That's the idea.
To speak on, another side of the continent is, what have you learned from working with Canadian and Taiwanese startups that you think could be applied to accelerate innovation in other emerging markets and ecosystems?
So I'll tell you what I learned from the Taiwanese, which is amazing, is, again, we worked on these programs with the Ministry of Science and Technology of Taiwan, is you have to learn and respect cultures, meaning that, when we work with these people, and many times, I would be working with these startups where I would get really frustrated with the way they were thinking about certain things. But the way someone thinks in Taiwan and Canada, in France, Morocco, anywhere in Asia, is conditioned by the way they grew up, what they've learned, and everything. So being able to empathize and listen is very important. I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, you have to make decisions, but I've learned that culturally people are very different. Two concrete example, both in Taiwan and Canada, and that's true for Europe too. A lot of startups get, and it happens in the US too, but less, non-dilutive funding, grants, university grants, subsidies, government, provincial, state subsidies, any type of, they get help, which is a good and bad thing. Because in Canada, my biggest problem, and there's one startup that I have in mind, that had super nice technology, really interesting in the life science space. It was founded by two physicians that were getting so much help from the university and from the province of Alberta that when I would basically suggest some people to come and help, and that they would have to give them equity, take a little more risk, it was very difficult for them to do that, which, ended up impacting the company significantly. But sometimes when you're in a comfort zone, if your back is not to the wall, then sometimes you're not willing to take certain risks. And that's true in Canada. In general, obviously there's, exceptions, but, you don't have the urgency. And when you don't have the urgency, a lot of entrepreneurs think it's not a big deal. Because, yeah, if I don't do it today, I'll do it in a month, 2 months, 6 months. And they'll tell me, you know what, let's keep talking. We'll keep talking, meaning, and they mean it. I mean, they're not being, dishonest. They say, we'll talk in 6 months, in a year. You can't do that. Like, your competitors are not waiting 6 months, 1 year. So you think there is no opportunity cost, but of course there is. The dollars that you're going after with a VC, if you don't get them, another company is going to get them. They're not just sitting there waiting for you. The competitor that, is developing something similar to what you're developing, they're not waiting, they're moving forward. So I'd say in a lot of people, you have to understand their culture and where they come from, why they think the way they think. But you also have to tell them that it's not called risk capital for no reason. You have to be taking a risk. If you don't take a risk, then, then go work for a company, because this is not how these things work. And with the Taiwanese, an added complexity, it's, like a lot of places, it's a very family oriented, the family is important. So when they have to give up equity, it is extremely complicated. Like, they don't want, you say, hey, we'll bring these people on, but, we have to give equity. It is very, very complicated for them to do that. And the place where it's easier is the Silicon Valley. But why? Not because people are smarter there, but they've seen people around them doing it and being successful. So I always tell people, in Canada, Taiwan, and elsewhere, 100% of zero is zero. You can be in control and have all your equity and, feel good that I have. But if the company is not growing, it's not growing. But, 50% of something that's growing because you brought up people, that the value of the company grows, is more than 100% of zero. It's just math. And again, the other, I'll say probably cheesy example I give is Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, the guy said, and this is the risk, I'm going to drop out of school at Harvard. If you're at Harvard and you're going to finish, then at that time, in terms of job opportunities, even if you're pursuing your business, like, I'm going to keep doing my startup, but if I don't drop, I have an amazing guarantee, because once I have my 4-year degree, I'm hitting a job. Even if this startup doesn't work, I'm going to get a 200K at that time, or 300K job. So I'm good. I'm going to keep doing my startup here. But when you do that, you always look back, and you are not 100% focused. If you drop from Harvard, then it's, my back is to the wall, I have to do it. And that's sometimes the entrepreneurs, if there's an option B, as an investor, you have a problem. Because when that guy feels things are shaky, they'll jump ship and leave you with your startup. On the venture studio, on the other hand, you have a whole ecosystem to support the startup. This is why venture studios actually speed to raising Series A is faster than a standalone startup, is because from the beginning they have a whole support system supporting them. But going back to what I was saying about Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, he came to the Bay Area and he gave shares to Sean Parker, the guy from people who were going to open doors for him very quickly. So he gave significant shares, but the company grew super fast. I guarantee you that at the same time, there were other companies doing what he was doing, social media platform and everything. But there was one that was very known, right? I think it was called Friendster, or I mean, you probably don't remember because you're probably much younger than I am, but there was another Facebook. There was another Facebook that was known at the beginning, completely disappeared. But because time to market is super important, people who can open doors. So you give shares, but then you see the guy today, the valuation of Facebook, what he's sitting on, and you're like, okay, it was a bet that made sense. I'm bringing in people, I'm giving share earlier, but I'm growing the company. So my 50% or 60% is worth much more than someone who has 100% who's sitting at home and saying, no, no, I can't give equity.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And that's a good way to think about it.
Well, I didn't invent it. It's something that you've seen every day.
Yeah. Yeah. What unique insights or skills have you brought with your background in marketing, business, and trade to startup teams that might be overlooked by technologies in healthcare?
But I'd say, again, it's amazing. All the questions you ask is all the stuff that I just spoke about right now is saying, you reach an age where it's just and the accumulated experience you get, where, I look at things today and I feel I have so much more perspective. And I'm not just speaking about myself. I'm speaking about everyone who's my age, who's been through what I've been through. Again, I am one of the most fortunate people in the world ever because my father and mother said, you can go do study in California. You can, go do your MBA at McGill. You can go live here. They gave me that. And throughout those experiences, I've met so many, and I've learned, and it's everything accumulated learning. Again, the biggest risk for all those new entrepreneurs are the things they don't know, which again makes complete sense. You just didn't have time to learn these things. You can't blame someone for not knowing what they don't know. And sometimes you learn through so I do tell my daughters, I give them advice, but I know that half of it goes and comes out the other ear super quick. And I respect that. I think it makes so much sense because it happened to me with my father. Sometimes you have to go through things for you to believe them. So when I speak to entrepreneurs and I tell them, listen, be careful, this is going to happen, or this is why it would make sense for you to work with us. Right? You say that to them, and obviously if they don't know you well, which is fine. They doubt you, They're like, maybe he's right, maybe he's not right. The day they know you're right is 5, 6 years later when they've gone through those motions again, which is normal, it's natural and everything. But unfortunately, they've lost those 5, 6 years. But this is what happened to me too. I mean, I failed various times. I failed in many things, but through each one of them, I've learned, and it's that accumulated wisdom. And by no means I have it all. I mean, I'm still learning every day, right? I mean, there's people that are older than me that still tell me things. I think the difference today is when someone gives me advice, I take it and I really analyze it much more because I know there is some truth because there's some things that they've experienced that I haven't experienced yet. So I think as a venture, going back the micro and talking about the venture studio, I think the most amazing thing, and again, I didn't invent that, the venture studio concept have existed for maybe 20, 30 years. But I think the most amazing thing about a venture studio is this ability to have so many perspectives and support system within a startup, which a stand-up startup doesn't have, right? Two co-founders get together, they start a business. Again, they don't know what they don't know, but they don't have a lot of those people who can give them advice. So it does make sense that in terms of risk, there is less risk in a startup within a venture studio, or one that goes through an incubator, Y Combinators and other, or accelerator. You have all this added value in terms of feedback that others don't have. It's just logical.
What are the keys to creating a thriving startup environment for healthcare? When founders are really in different areas across the globe, such as, they're founders, mentors, and investors. They're
Yeah.
in different places scattered. So how does that work?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, a lot of people confuse or being virtual or distributed doesn't mean not being involved. So what I'm saying is, one thing that you just said is being involved with the industry, meaning that you can have a startup in AI, medical AI startup, let's say, that says we have 2 or 3 clinics. Once we have our first MVP, that is telling us we can test that solution with them. So I think that's amazing. So I would say that's the answer to your question, is you can be a distributed startup, and there's one called Deep Echo. So Deep Echo is a startup that started in Morocco, and now I think now is headquartered in the US. One of the founder, the physician behind it, is I believe a radiologist who was in Morocco, and he moved to New York and is now in New York. But there's a lot of, in AI, you need a lot of data. So the more data you're accumulating, where you can go through actual images and basically run them through your AI system, the more accurate it is. So that startup can be absolutely virtual. It can have an investor in Morocco, one in the Bay Area. The CTO was, I believe, in New York. Again, don't quote me on this, but I know it's a very dispersed team. The CEO, I believe, is between Morocco and Europe. At the end of the day, you have people working on the language models, on the algorithm, and you have someone who's responsible for running these with actual images and data in a hospital setting. If you're an investor, that's what you want. You want to know that your system works, that it's accurate, that it's saving so much time and so many lives and money to hospitals. If you can prove that to an investor, he couldn't care less if the CTO is in New York and the CEO is in Morocco. So the answer to your question is, you want to show that when you're pitching, and again, if you're not that evolved, let's say you're early on, that you've done your homework in terms of voice of the customer. This is why my solution is working, is going to work. These are the features, and these are the people in industry that I'm dealing with, that are agreeing with me, and that thing. And this is where I'm going to test it at these places. So it shows the solution is working, because that's, and the size of the market. So I think those things you can have if your team is distributed. You don't have to be in the same place. Deep Echo or any other company can have one of their collaborators based in Sydney, Australia, but that has 2 hospitals that are going to be using the software every day for 6 months and showing that it works, that it's actually helping, that there is these clinical outcomes that you want. Once you have that, then that's what the investor wants to hear, on top of the fact, obviously, that, that it's a need that is global, that, that there's a market.
Tying into, what you mentioned about global, right? Obviously the global health crisis highlights the need for solutions being developed in very diverse markets and diverse mentalities. How do you see, international collaboration accelerating, these innovations to tackle those urgent challenges?
I'm very optimistic about the way things are going in terms of investment in innovation and how that innovation is going to positively impact health in the world. I'm working on another program with an organization called the Africa Diaspora Network. It's a US-based organization that is based in the Bay Area, and they have acceleration program for African Americans in the US, but also entrepreneurs and also Africans in Africa. And one of the companies that we're looking at is one that has developed a device for breast cancer, imaging, but that's much cheaper than what you have, that can be used in community hospitals in the US, and much cheaper, but also in Africa. There are so many VCs that are impact oriented, that tell you, I want to invest in a business that obviously makes money, because I have to make money, right? I mean, that's what my investors, my LPs, have put money with me to make money. But we have a mandate and the requirement that it has to be impact. It has to basically impact positively communities, either in sustainability, ecology, or healthcare, or whatever. There's so many funds like this today that you have to be optimistic, because there's a lot of money in the billions that's being poured in these innovations. So you can't help but think that it's going to work. Again, AI is going to be a huge enabler in democratizing health, but technology, small devices, portable devices that are much cheaper to produce. The price points go down. You can have them in a lot of different places. Again, in the US, in areas that are not wealthy, but also in Africa and elsewhere. So again, I'm optimistic there that it's going to help improve health outcomes worldwide. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't still have problems, that there's things that are unacceptable, but it's going in the right direction.
I'm curious to know, though, I guess, based on what you're saying, what advice do you give entrepreneurs about raising capital and building global networks in today's decentralized and virtual first world, as you're saying?
Yes. So obviously, they should keep the in-person meetings as much as they can. I think that's also, again, throughout this whole conversation that we've been having for an hour or so, I don't want people to think that I'm saying you shouldn't be meeting people. But what they should absolutely do is adopt and be more, engaged in the virtual ecosystem. So the LinkedIn, social media, again, I'm not saying social media for entertainment, that's one thing, but social media in terms of being present in LinkedIn, speaking about what you're doing, like posting about what you're doing and posting when you have something interesting to say. Just don't post for to post. What I was telling you earlier about reaching out to people that are in your space that you think could understand what you're doing and help you open doors. These are the things that I would absolutely highlight. And again, as if I haven't said it enough, I feel the entrepreneurs that put themselves out there, they have no shame in asking, I have an edge over someone who's working in their corner. You have people who tell you, I'm going to keep working on my solution. There's one entrepreneur that I'm speaking to who's absolutely brilliant in technology. And he's developing this whole solution in stealth mode. And he's saying, no, I don't want to talk about it. I want to finish it first. And I keep telling him, there is a huge risk in what you're doing. First of all, you're not getting feedback from people. You're not engaged enough with the outside world, be it your potential customers for them to test and understand what you're doing, but also your investor. So you absolutely have to be engaging with people to advance. Otherwise, and again, the world is the way it is virtual. It's an opportunity. I mean, 30 years ago, if you were anywhere in the US, in Chicago, anywhere, and you wanted to connect to the Bay Area, to the VCs, to people who have a risk appetite, you either had to go there or you had to go there. You had to go there, go knock at doors. Today, I think that's changing. Obviously, there is more noise in social media. That's just a fact. But you have to try. You have to be out there connecting with people, reaching out to people that you don't know, but be very strategic about it and don't reach out to people if you don't have something concrete, convincing to tell them. You have people who do that, they're just starting to work on a project and they go to reach out to someone who's actually in that sector, but do not go to someone and tell them, hey, I have an idea. Credibility and leverage. Go when you have something substantial and be ready to explain to them why what you're doing is a paradigm shift in his sector. Why, what you're doing, that I think you have a better chance of getting their attention and succeeding than just going, So again, the short answer is the world is becoming virtual and you have two options. Either you jump in the bandwagon and do your part or do nothing and be left behind.
My last question for you before we jump to the lightning round is, how are founders in different regions approaching AI, as you mentioned, and what role do you see for AI in leveling the playing field for global healthcare innovation?
So my sense from what I see, for example, so as I said, the last year and a half, I've been traveling quite a bit, mostly to North Africa, is I think most people who are in technology understand that AI is a paradigm shift. It's a new technological revolution. So they do understand it. I think people who are not so much in it, I don't think probably understand how big the change will be and how significantly it's going to impact society in general, like people who basically jobs that you're not going to need anymore. And the other thing that I think people don't understand is those waves that happened in the past happened at a certain speed. I think the more the new waves come, the change is so quick that I think people are going to be a lot of people are going to be shocked at how quickly some of these things are going to be implemented. I mean, it's just, I think it's happening and it's happening really fast. But I think most people who are entrepreneurs and innovators, if they are doing their homework and reading, they know that AI is here to stay, first of all, for sure. Even though there are ethical issues that have to be resolved for sure. And, people are talking about them and they understand that they have to be part of it, and in terms of your second part of the question, for me, it's absolutely clear that the impact on health worldwide and health outcomes, for me, it's going to improve a lot of things very quickly. Again, not only in the developed world, but there's going to be in Africa, for example. The reason why Africa is super interesting is when in Morocco, when they were building landlines, phone landlines, right? I mean, again, you have to take into account that Morocco was probably 20, 30 years behind Europeans. So they were landlines, but, it took a while to build the infrastructure. And I remember when I was younger, we had the landline. Most of the people, middle, upper class, had landlines, but the further down you went, the harder it was to get landlines. We got to a point where cell phones came so quickly that they stopped building landlines. So they basically overtook I think AI is going to do a lot of similar things in health in Africa, where you go to places where there was no health infrastructure, like very small, hospitals or no hospital at all, where, personalized healthcare, they'll be able to have devices to actually diagnose what they have very quickly without having to go to a doctor. But they're going to bypass the phase that in Europe, in the US, you have those structures. So it's harder to implement them in these countries because you have a force. In Africa, you have a forcing factor. It's like, hey, I need to have these people out. Most of my African doctors stayed in the US or in the UK. Let's start implementing technology where I can help them virtually. In Morocco, for example, there's a company that does those mobile hospitals where you go in and it's all on Zoom. The doctors are in Casablanca, but in remote villages, you have a screen. The patient comes in, you might have a nurse or an aide that helps guide them, but that's what's going to happen very quickly. So AI, I think, is going to improve health outcomes and health in general in a lot of places. But in Africa, probably even faster, and the impact is going to be more significant than in developed countries.
Now it's time for the lightning round. So
Okay.
My first question for you is, what's the most underestimated advantage for healthcare founders outside of Silicon Valley right now?
I would say definitely by burn rates. If you're in the Silicon Valley today, whatever you do, if you're developing in the Bay Area, engineers, they're costing you 3-4 times more than they would cost you outside of the Bay Area, and even maybe 10 times more than what it costs you outside the US. So I'd say that's the biggest one. You can bring in investors who know that their million is going to go a much longer way than a million in a startups in the Silicon Valley. Everything is more expensive. Rent is more expensive. It's just the way it is.
My next question for you is, what, in one sentence, is the biggest barrier you see to global startup collaboration in healthcare today?
I think it's adoption of the virtual tools, and as I said, outreach, being out there and reaching out. So I see a lot of again, you said one sentence, and again, I went on a limb and speaking much more than one sentence, but I would say, virtual engagement. I think there's a lot of great tools. If people engage, they can, find a lot of like-minded people, complementary people to collaborate and move these concepts forward.
And my last question for you is, what's one emerging technology besides AI you believe will really open up the greatest opportunities for innovation in African healthcare and potentially across the continent and across the world during the next few years?
Besides AI is robotics, obviously. I think that's the other space technology that I think is disrupting. We were talking about Da Vinci, about intuitive surgical, but robotics, I think, again, is going to completely, it's a paradigm shift in Africa because, you can install those robots, and they've started doing these procedures in Morocco that I'm aware of because I've seen it in the news, but probably elsewhere also. you can do these procedures 30, what was it, 3, 4, 5, 10,000 miles away, where you have a doctor on one side, but you have a machine, so that for me, yeah, definitely.
Well, Hatim, thank you very much for your time today and speaking about the startup mentality in healthcare and, the leverage that, virtual and the global side of all this really is going to help change. For the audience, maybe what are some, few thoughts and final thoughts that you would like to add?
First of all, thank you so much for this interview. I love these kind of exchanges because it makes me think also. And thank you for the very pertinent questions. I truly appreciate it. And again, my last thought is for our audience to embrace, I would say, definitely the new virtual reality that we're in and to be very engaged. Again, there's a lot of noise in social media, but be hyper focused in what you're doing and not to be afraid to ask. I think that's the lesson from what we talked about is put yourself out there. That's how things happen.
Well, thank you again for your time. Where can people
My
choose
pleasure.
to connect with you or follow you if they choose to do so?
Yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is the easiest, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of the LinkedIn platform, so they can actually reach out to me through my LinkedIn account, www.linkedin.com/ and then first and last name Hatim Chraibi, and then my name is right here, and they'll be able to find me. I think it's probably the easiest way for them to reach out to me. And again, happy to engage. Time permitting, love to talk to people, help in any way I can.
Well, Hatim, thank you for your time today on the K.
Thank you, Mezue. Thank you. Really enjoyed the chat.
Of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.